Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions. If you like the show, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Joining me today, we have Logan Wilkinson. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing great.
Excellent, excellent. And today we're going to be talking all about the OG National Treasure. Obviously, we've done a couple episodes in recent months of the National Treasure Edge of History series, including last week's episode where Frank and I kind of discussed season one as a whole, and that had originally kicked off because of an enjoyment in general of National Treasure. So we figured, hey, let's go ahead and just go full tilt the rest of February, and we'll do National Treasure this week, and we'll do National Treasure Book of Secrets next week to knock them all out. They've been on the backlog list of Disney Plus things to tackle for a while now. So what better time than when maybe SEO is kind of visible on
At
the
its
thing.
peak.
Yeah. Although, as Frank and I talked about last week, we didn't really see anybody talking about the show. So,
Yeah.
Admittedly, I don't think our circles were necessarily the target audience for it, but, but yes, as I've talked about a couple times recently, a little bit of the history lesson here for National Treasure. Originally released November 19th, 2004. The follow-up there, Book of Secrets, will be released in December 21st, 2007. Other releases of the time, we had Friday Night Lights and Halloween Town High that had come out October 8th, 2004. Team America World Police, October 15th. Sideways, October 22nd.
You're right. This is a very familiar rundown.
I've read
all
it.
these movies.
Yep.
Yeah.
I had it in the doc last week, but I only kind of picked and chose some of the answers. But yeah, basically we went through this whole thing back when we did the Edge of History one.
Right.
But yeah, the original Saw was October 29th of that year. The Incredibles, November 5th. The Polar Express, November 10th. National Treasure and the original SpongeBob SquarePants movie were a doubleheader on November 19th. Blade Trinity, December 8th. Ocean's 12, December 10th. $1 Million Baby, December 15th. The Jim Carrey, Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, December 17th. And the weird trio of The Aviator, Fat Albert, and The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, December 25th, Christmas of 2004 there. Runtime has 2 hours and 11 minutes. And in the Disney live-action timeline of films, because this was a Disney film, not like one of those Fox films that has now been acquired by Disney. This was Disney from its onset. We had Around the World in 80 Days had come out June 16th, 2004 with Jackie Chan. We had The Princess Diaries 2, Royal Engagement with a young Anne Hathaway at the time, August 11th, 2004. Then we had National Treasure there, November 19th, 2004. We would follow that up with The Pacifier with a post Fast and Furious, but before Fast and Furious became Fast and Furious, Vin Diesel.
Yeah.
March 4th, 2005. Ice Princess was March 18th, 2005. And Herbie Fully Loaded was June 22nd, 2005. Ice Princess was, even now I don't remember who was in it. It was one of those it may have been a direct to DVD, but it was listed as a Disney
movie
films thing, so I included it there. But yeah, I basically wanted to get up to Herbie Fully Loaded because I do remember that one, and being we're bringing back Herbie. Okay. Our roll call here, we have the director John Turteltaub, who previously had done Three Ninjas. We've talked about him here on That D Plus show when we did the episode on Cool Runnings.
Phenomenal
he was
movie.
Director of that. He would also go on to do While You Were Sleeping, Phenomenon, and The Kid. Here after National Treasure, he would do National Treasure Book of Secrets. He would then do The Sorcerer's Apprentice with Nicolas Cage as well. And eventually, or most recently, one of the things he worked on was The Meg with Jason Statham. So, yeah. Our writers here, Jim Koff, having a story and screenplay credit. Previously, he had done Operation Demo Drop and Rush Hour. Cormac and Marianne Wibberley worked on the screenplay. They also did Charlie's Angels Full Throttle, Bad Boys 2,
Good movie.
and
It's a
then
good movie.
all these years later have returned to National Treasure. They were the creators and showrunners for the television series. And then Oren Aviv and Charles Seegers were also credited on the story, and that's pretty much all they had worked on. Our cast of characters here, of course, we have Nicolas Cage here as Benjamin Franklin Gates, who was previously in things like Raising Arizona, which I give a shout out to because I was almost in Raising Arizona. I don't know if I've told the story on the podcast but when I was a baby, my folks basically took me to audition for the role of Arizona in Raising Arizona. And as they tell it, I made it to like one of the final rounds of auditions where Nicolas Cage was holding me in his arms. But then I cried because they'd kept me up past my bedtime, and I did not ultimately get the part. Tear. But he would also go on to be in Leaving Las Vegas, The Rock, Face Off. After this, he would, of course, be in National Treasure Book of Secrets. And then more recently, he was in the films Pig and last year's excellent film that made both mine and Logan's top 10 films of the year, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. He's also probably in, a dozen other things every year throughout there that you either know or don't know because he just kind of picks all sorts of crazy
He's Nick
movies.
Cage. Yeah.
Diane Kruger here as Abigail Chase. Prior to this, she had been in the movie Troy. And then after this, she would go on to be in Inglourious Bastards and National Treasure Book of Secrets, as well as the film Unknown. Justin Bartha as Riley Poole. Prior to this, he was in Geely. After this, he would go on to be in the National Treasure Book of Secrets film, as well as the Hangover movies. And then he did make a little cameo appearance in National Treasure Edge of History. Sean Bean, of course, as Ian Howe, had been in GoldenEye prior to this, as well as the Lord of the Rings films. Then he would go on to be, of course, in Game of Thrones, and he was also the narrator of Civilization 6. Fun fact.
That's a fun fact.
John Voight as Patrick Gates here had been in Midnight Cowboy, Deliverance, Runaway Train, and Anaconda.
Anaconda, what a great shout out. Yeah.
Harvey Keitel as Sadusky here, later given a name Peter Sadusky. He was in Taxi Driver, Bugsy, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Sister Act, Little Nicky, of course, the original National Treasure films of this and Book of Secrets. And then more recently, he was in Grand Budapest Hotel and The Irishman. Christopher Plummer in here.
I know, I forgot about this. Yeah,
I forgot about it too. As John Adams Gates at the beginning of the film, telling his tall tales. Of course, made his breakout starring role in the Sound of Music film way back when. But then he would go on and be in projects like A Beautiful Mind, Inside Man, Up, and Knives Out, the original Knives Out film. And then lastly, Armando Riesco as Agent Hendricks, a very nothing kind of role in this, but I want to give him a shout out because A, he was in Garden State, and B, he would go on to be in National Treasure Book of Secrets and a ultimately very pivotal role in National Treasure Edge of History. If you want more on that, you can listen to last week's episode, which does dive into full spoilers on that, but I will spare those here. Some trivia here. This movie suggests that something is written on the back of the Declaration of Independence. It is true that something is written on the back. The writing on the back of the Declaration of Independence reads, Original Declaration of Independence, dated 4th July, 1776, and it appears on the bottom of the document upside down. While no one knows for certain who wrote it, it is known that early in its life, the large parchment document measures 29 3/4 inches by 24.5 inches, was rolled up for storage, so it is likely that the notation was simply added as a label. Yay for bureaucracy, pre-historical caring about that stuff.
Preservation, right, yeah.
Yeah. Ben, Patrick, and John Gates are all named after founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, Patrick Henry, and John Adams. Abigail Chase is a combination of Abigail Adams, wife of John, and Samuel Chase, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and later an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Okay. At the end of the movie, when Ben starts to tell Riley about the house he bought, the house actually belonged to Charles Carroll, the last surviving man who had signed the Declaration. This also happens to be the man who told Ben's ancestor the secret about the Charlotte in the beginning of the movie. I love that IMDb, this is actually like one of the most like upvoted trivia things in IMDb. One of the few movies where Sean Bean's character does not die, as of whenever that came out. And lastly here, when Riley at the end of the movie says he got a measly 1.5% of the treasure money, Benjamin Franklin Gates' earlier estimate back in the church with Sadusky of $10 billion is accurate, Riley would have made $50 million, which means Ben turned down $1 billion. So there's some National Treasure math for you. So, Logan, how does this hold up? What did you think revisiting National Treasure?
I think that National Treasure is probably one of, and I kind of had this thought when I was rewatching it. It is probably one of the movies I've seen the most in my life. I feel like every year in school from like 7th grade through to like actual college classes, I was shown this movie at least once a year in some sort of history class. Right. It was like the go-to movie that we would get shown in history class in like junior high and high school. Like I've probably seen this movie like 15 times.
It is the realization of like, oh yeah, I was already out of high school when this movie came out. I was already in college.
Yeah, that's like right when I was getting into like junior high, right? And so like, yeah, junior high definitely watched it. High school definitely watched it. I remember seeing it at least once in college, right? It's like, and then I just like also getting to watch it for fun because I do love National Treasure, right? This is again a movie that is very inspired by Indiana Jones and those kind of B serial movies. And as someone who obviously is a humongous Indiana Jones fan, it was basically Indiana Jones 4 before we got that. And yeah, it's great.
It was also something I was thinking about today, and I actually like did some digging and looked it up, was how much I was like, where did this come out in relation to the Da Vinci Code? Because
that's what Shravia said as well. It's so funny you say that.
That was like obviously. And the Da Vinci Code came out March 18th, 2003 was when the book came out. So year and a half ahead of this. I highly doubt that like somebody read the Da Vinci Code and was like, let's do that, but for America, and was able to turn it around in a year and a half.
The movie
like
came out a few years later, right? Yeah.
But yeah, the movie obviously would come out a few years later. But even before the movie ever came out, like that book had blown up and taken the world by storm. Like I remember I was working at Costco basically at the time, and like they would fly off the shelves, and I ended up buying a copy when they did like an illustrated guide. So it was like the book, but with like all of the art that's actually referenced in the thing inserted in. And so you can see the Last Supper when they're talking about the Last Supper, and you can kind of see all those images. And it's just wild that like this was like, I think a peak period for this kind of movie of like, we're going to go on this like educational but faux educational adventure across all of these different things. And it's also interesting, especially hearing the context that like you watch this, regularly in school. I'm like, I don't know that this should be treated as like an educational artifact, because it is obviously very fictionalized. Which it would be like, and admittedly I wouldn't have a problem with this, but it would be like nowadays giving kids Hamilton in class or something like that, and you're going to have kids walking out with like a entertaining view of history, but also a slightly skewed, because it was very fictionalized and dramatized, certain elements of history.
I think Hamilton's probably more accurate historically than this is.
But I also think I don't doubt that. But like I'm in particular, I'm thinking like but characters like Angelica Schuyler and the relationships and stuff like that. Yeah,
I do think that it's. I mean, I'm not a history teacher, but I mean it's sort of that thing of like, we want to watch a movie for 3 days. What's a history-based movie?
Yeah.
National Treasure, great, right?
It's if it's done like responsibly and like, okay, so here's what was in the movie, here's what's accurate about what's in the movie, and here's where they took some liberties.
It's also funny that you say that this is sort of the time period for this, because it's also that same time period of like Matthew McConaughey in Sahara, which is another like history-based thing based on like a Confederate ship full of treasure crashing and like ended up in the Sahara Desert somehow, and like another like history treasure hunt thing, right? Like they had to fill that Indiana Jones void wherever they could. They were cranking out a lot of these like B-tier adventure and movies back in the day, and like
it's I mean it's the age old like Hollywood thing of like your volcano and Dante's Peak, like people landing on the same ideas at the same time, Deep Impact and Armageddon.
Yeah, that it's really funny, and I think one of the things that has led to National Treasure have had such a crazy staying power, I think, an impact on like my age group, right? Who was like entering like middle school, junior high kind of time period. Is I think it is the closest one to capturing the magic of Indiana Jones, right? I think Nicolas Cage is, God, we could do a whole podcast on Nicolas Cage. He's such a like weirdly charismatic individual, and like he almost shouldn't be. He doesn't really fit the mold of like what a stereotypical like Hollywood like heartthrob or like charismatic actor looks like or just is or acts like even. But he just has a screen presence to him, and he's got this charm to him. He's got this twinkle in his eyes, even as far back as Raising Arizona to as recent as The Underrated of Massive Talent. He just has like this presence to him. You can't help but watch and sort of be drawn in by him. And I think the cast around him is so good in this movie, actually, right? Like, I think Riley's a perfect, like, comedic, like, helper guy. I think Sean Bean is great. Sean Bean is Sean Bean, right? I mean, he's never really misfired. And then I think Diane Kruger is also great, just as she would be in Inglourious Bastards and a bunch of other stuff. And, you know, this is a good Jon Voight performance before he, like, went insane. And so it's just a great, and Harvey Keitel, right? And so, like, it's just a great small cast. The cast is not huge by any means, but each one of them is just going at such a good clip. I think the story is engaging and enthralling. I think it beats along at such a good pace. And just like the best adventure, like treasure hunting stories out there, it knows where to speed up and slow down and linger on moments and what things to kind of hop around a bit quicker at. Like, we don't spend a ton of time on like the Silence Do Good letters. We kind of get there, get the little kid to write them all down, and then we're off to the next thing, where we linger a lot more at like Constitution Hall, right? And the Liberty Bell in that section, right? And I think the cat and mouse game between Ian and Ben is really good. And I like that, you know, Sean Bean is not like diabolically evil, right? Like, there is some level of nuance to him. And yeah, I think it is just a great movie, right? And I think they just hit that formula so well in a way they don't or certainly I don't remember them hidden in Book of Secrets. Maybe I'll be surprised next week. Even just hitting.
I was just gonna say, I think to your point of like the staying power of this movie, I think especially for like for us, there's obviously a lot just inherent to the founding of America kind of stuff, and the like the amount of time that was like beat into our heads in the education system and stuff like that. So even if I wasn't watching this movie in school, obviously, like the first 9 weeks every year of American history was all of this. Like,
let's learn about the founding fathers again, guys.
Exactly. To the point, like in my high school tenure, we never made it up past the Korean War. Like,
I got to the Vietnam War once. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So it's like I am way well more versed in like these like early moments of American history than I am, the last 50 years. Because of just that. The structure of the American education system. I would be very curious if someone like Jono like has any kind of love for this as an Australian or stuff like that. And I think when you get into Book of Secrets, we'll revisit that next week. And that as one that I haven't like revisited a ton. I probably only watched it once, maybe twice. Like, I think what I think of that one is, okay, well, they burned through all of like the good stuff in this first one. So where are they going to go from there for the next one? So
one of the things in the DVD commentary, I know that one of the people talks back in which one is how, to the surprise of no one, this wasn't meant to be a series. This was meant to be like a fun one-off movie, right? And so even to your point of like, they burned all the good stuff right in the first one. Yeah, because it wasn't going to have a sequel, right? And then just like with another movie that came out at the same time period in Pirates of the Caribbean, it was unexpectedly a huge hit. And they were like, well, let's not leave money on the table here, guys, right? And let's crank out another one. And so there's sort of, the law of diminishing returns a little bit here, right? And again, part of what makes Indiana Jones such a weird, fluky series is it is just a collection of 3 movies, really 2 of the 3, that are like phenomenal movies, right? And like it's just great. Like sequels are hard to do, right? We talk about that a lot in all of our shows, right? And especially these kind of sequels.
Even there, I think all of the racist elements of Temple of Doom notwithstanding, I think there is a significant point to be made there in that like the MacGuffin in the first one is the Ark of the Covenant, a well-known religious artifact for a largely religious country here in America. Then we go to the stones in Temple of Doom, which mean nothing to us, and then we go back to the Holy Grail in
the most famous, right?
Yeah.
Right. Like, yeah, that's a great point too, right? And I think we like shift. From what I remember, we shifted to like the Civil War time period, right? In Book of Secrets, and it's like one of his ancestors who's like framed as one of the Lincoln.
He was. He was like one of the assassins, or he like one of the conspirators assassinating Lincoln.
Right. And so like
which again, even there is like, well, it's weird that that's going to be such a big thing when it clearly didn't come up in this one and hasn't been a chain around the family's neck this whole time.
Also because like it's even more of a thing because like, look, everyone knows John Wilkes Booth. I'll give you that. Everyone knows that. That's like the one name you're going to remember from like the Lincoln assassination. I'll give you that 100%. Can you name any other assassin or conspirator from the Lincoln assassination, right? Like, I'm someone who has a degree in this stuff, and even I would have to strain to think of this, right? And so it's like, okay, sure, he could be like, even if his great-great-grandpa was that dude, I really feel like it's not that big of a historical burden for you, especially in the aftermath of what you just did in the first. Like your family slate is clean now, I think, but nonetheless, it is going to be the thing we chase after here, right? And so there again, that point of like they sort of got all the good bits out of the first movie and then had to kind of figure out what they wanted to do for the second one. And it was just sort of the low-hanging fruit. Mm-hmm. But here it's great. I really do think this movie is so much fun. I still really am in love with it. And like, is there an element of that is like childhood nostalgia? Probably. I was 12, right? Like I was like the perfect age to watch this movie when it first came out. I won't deny that. And I've seen it a whole bunch. But like, yeah, like I think it's great, right? Like I am a sucker. I do love these kind of globe-trotting adventure movies. See Indiana Jones, see Uncharted, see even James Bond to a degree, I guess. But like, these are stories I really like, and I think National Treasure does it really well. I also think that what a lot of those kind of movies struggle with is usually being funny and having a good sense of humor. That's what Sahara doesn't do well. And I think National Treasure is really funny. They're great one-liners here. They're great kind of flippy bits. Nicolas Cage is just given great physical comedy. His reactions, his eyebrow raises are great and on point. And yeah, like he's also just like a weird dude to watch do stuff. So there's like an inherent sense of humor and like, I think not too dramatic stakes attached to it because of that. One of my favorite bits is always going to be him walking out with the real Declaration of Independence and then the clerk thinking that he's trying to steal it from the shop. Mm-hmm. It's funny every time. Him like dropping down the coins and be like, I've got 32.25. I need 3 more. Okay. It's great. And I love the way that plays into like a major story point as well. And yeah, like I think it's a fun movie, right? And it's a great globe-trotting adventure film. And I had a great time. I don't know about you, but I had a really good time with this.
Yeah, I admittedly didn't rewatch it for today, but I did rewatch it when we did the first Edge of History episode. So it's only a couple months. It's been a couple months since I watched it or since I rewatched it, and I largely rewatched it to like try and remember like, okay, how's it going to play into, and I think we talked about it on that episode, but like one of the things that like surprised me was the Harvey Keitel nature of this. Like I completely forgot he was in this movie. Like so much of my memory of this movie is Nicolas Cage versus Sean Bean. And so when Harvey Keitel gets introduced,
like the first half of the film, to be fair.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And gets thrown in. It's like, oh, that's right. There is also this element of the movie that
third element,
that
right.
It maybe is a little more complicating than it really needs to be, but ultimately, yeah, I guess you need some, since you're not going to have Nicolas Cage
you need the MacGuffin,
take the fall.
Of Nick Cage, right,
you need to have you need to have Sean Bean take the fall, and so somebody's got to be there to take out Sean Bean at the end of the movie. So yeah, like that whole element was like that's a thing I had completely, like if you'd asked me to like recap National Treasure prior to that, I would have been like, they steal the Declaration of Independence, and then a few other things happen, and then they end up in some catacombs, and they trick Sean Bean with the 1 if by land, 2 if by sea thing, and then they find the treasure.
Yeah,
and that's
very good, Trevor. Yeah,
that's what I would have remembered, kind of thing. And so yeah, this like the extra little like steps there, like the Silas Dougad thing. I'm like, even when that was coming up in the movie, I'm like, I don't remember this. I don't know this thing as a historical thing, apart from having been told it's a historical thing from National Treasure. Sure, okay. Ben Franklin wrote these letters. Fine. But yeah, the one of the other trivia things I didn't include, but like the idea that even if you take out the daylight savings time thing that Riley kind of introduces, that is like one of the worst clues in this movie, because that the sun positioning and the shadows are going to be drastically different any time of the year based on the sun's position on the earth. So like any other season, any other day, that shadow is going to be pointing in a different place.
It's also a bad clue because really you just needed to get them on the roof. And then there's literally a symbol on the brick. It's not like there are that many bricks in the wall. So really just you'd be like, go to this hall and look down, and then just there's a wall of stuff here, right? So like even there is like only so accurate, because he didn't see like, oh, it's on that exact one. He just saw where it was pointing and was like, that's the wall, let's go there, right? And so yeah, it's not a great clue. Yeah. I do always love Nicolas Cage with the water bottle though, of being like, let's zoom in here like the water bottle's a magnifying glass. Yeah. So that's where I go back to like, maybe this shouldn't be taught in schools as gospel. But again, if teachers are out there being like, okay, so let's watch the movie now. Everybody write an essay on 10 things that the movie gets wrong, kind of thing. I think that would be an interesting, homework assignment for a American history high school teacher. But yeah, like it's definitely still fun, especially like one of the most recent movies I saw like this that I think we talked about previously was the Uncharted movie last year, which fun globetrotting adventure kind of thing, and now. Like, especially having now seen the entirety of the Edge of History season, it's like, yeah, they're just kind of hitting that formula, and okay, we're going to have a few tentpole clues / like heisty things. Obviously, the big one here is we're going to steal the Declaration of Independence. And that's like the fact that is done so early, and then they do a whole bunch of clues after that while they're on the run with the Declaration of Independence is like, yeah, maybe build up to that next time, because that seems to be the normal structure of things. It would have been like, oh, that's what has the final clue that's going to get you where you need to go. Nope, not in this one. Not even. That's gonna be our act one. Many clues are left, right? That's the thing, right?
That's gonna be the act one, and then we're gonna meander for the middle act of the film. We're gonna introduce some family drama between Nicolas Cage and John Voight. And tease Helen Mirren, even though Helen Mirren would not have at all been cast by this point.
That's always one of my favorite things, that like they very, like, to me, it is very clear that the mom is dead. Is what is like the way that it's like phrased in this movie. It's like very clear, like the mom is clearly dead. They just don't say your mom was dead, but they're like, like I had your mom for however brief that was, and like like she was like my everything, and like every word is like a way of saying like she's no longer with us, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then again, they didn't think they were gonna have a sequel, so it was fine. And they were like, oh, actually, we're gonna have a sequel. Let's actually have the mom not be dead, and be Helen Mirren instead, and it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think obviously, as you kind of touched on, like so much of the fun of this is Nicolas Cage just kind of going up to 11, and in a lot of other hands, this probably would not have worked as well. This movie just wouldn't have sailed as well. So it's always like that's the best like testament to Nicolas Cage is how he elevates material that's fine, not bad, but like he takes it and adds like another layer to it that does make it just a good fun time. There is a whole bunch of this where I'm like, like Riley is there obviously for the comedic relief. I will say the series did a good job of like retconning a thing in National Treasure. Basically, in the episode that he appears in the TV show, he talks about how he was talking about like he introduced the idea that Charlotte wasn't a person but was the ship. Like he was talking about, I think he describes it as like I was talking about the yacht I would buy once we found the money if we discover this, and what would I name my ship, and that was what led Ben to realize the Charlotte was a ship, not a girl, kind of thing. It's like, oh, okay, that's a fun like little 20 years later retconning to help make him more important of a character in the original, like he's
the hacker, bro.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, and yeah, that he's very early 2000s hacker. So that was a thing you needed in all these heist movies. Absolutely.
One of my very favorite tropes, and it, for obvious reasons, doesn't exist anymore, but from like 1995, 1995 is a great example, with like Boris and GoldenEye through to like 2008, maybe we'll say, the hacker trope is one of my favorite things. They're all ridiculous. They're all outlandish. They're all over the top. And it's always so much fun to see, especially now, right? Like one of the things I got out of National Treasure this time too, because I haven't seen it, it's been a few years since I've seen it, is, and I really want to do this. We've talked about this off air too. Just like I want to do like almost like a series just on films from like 2006 and before, because there's something special about like those like 90s and like early 2000 movies that like where like the internet exists, but in no way is it like reminiscent of this. And there's no smartphones, there's no cell phones really, and just like the way that the world is being like operated in National Treasure is so different than it would be now, right? And like even like the flashback to the 70s of like him having like the flash, it's like, oh yeah, like that is just not a reality that kids would have nowadays, right? Mm-hmm. They would just use their smartphone and flash it and they're ready to go, right? And it's just like so many little things. And so yeah, I do love how early 2000s National Treasure is. It is like almost like this time capsule.
One of the in that vein, like one of the things I always think about in terms of like how technology has changed storytelling is the number of plays that exist where crucial information, and obviously TVs and movies as well, but like I remember it dawning on me while reading or working on a play, the amount of information crucial information that is relayed on an answering machine. That cannot be a storytelling thing anymore, because nobody has answering machines that you just, you can, like, it will go to a voicemail, and that voicemail doesn't just play on your phone if you're not answering it. But in storytelling, somebody's in the shower and somebody calls and they leave a voicemail and the person hears it, here's something they weren't supposed to hear because they were in the other room or something like that.
Right. Absolutely. That's a great shout out.
Yeah. It's a weird like story trope that doesn't really work nowadays. And so you have to come up with like, the new version would be like, oh, somebody left their computer on and you saw a Facebook message or something like that.
Even because that's even like in like games, so like Gone Home uses like a voice message very importantly to be right in that game, right? And that's a great shout out, Trevor. Yeah, I mean, even for comedic purposes, right? Like I think of like George's voicemail message in Seinfeld, right? Is like, very famous of like how like stupid and dumb it is and how he's trying to like draw it out to get people to not leave a message, right? And just get off the call. Obviously wouldn't be a trope you could do at all nowadays in a comedy, right? There is, this is very 30-year-old of us to get into a conversation on this, but there is something very interesting. We've had this conversation before on the podcast and like in person too, of how me and you and Cameron, that generation sort of had it the best both ways, right? Like where we did exist in a world pre the internet and, could run outside and touch grass. And then also we're young enough to be internet literate, right? And be familiar with this and grow up and do these kind of things and be very familiar with that world, right? And we sort of were like the interstitial generation. Like even Frank is probably too young to have really any memories not with like computers and technology. And so like it is just sort of interesting to have that kind of be the reality, right? Like I think even like we had this a little bit when we talked about Home Alone 3 for that D Plus show back in December, right? Of like how so many of that movie's plot points could be solved by like, I have a cell phone now, right?
Yeah.
Or the internet exists really in a way that it doesn't in 1998 when that movie came out or whatever, right? And so, yeah, like obviously the big one is how many horror movie plots could be solved in like 60 seconds if you have a cell phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's done, right? And that's why you have to usually...
That's why it's always a cabin in the woods where there's no service.
Or set them in the past, right? Be like, oh, we're just going to make it be like back in time, right? And that's the solution to this kind of thing, right? And so, yeah, like it is sort of interesting. And that's why I do love these movies set around this time period, like the late 90s, early 2000s, where like they sort of almost have to like guesstimate of like what the internet is actually going to be, right? And like Fast and Furious does this a little bit, right? Like, obviously National Treasure is doing it, right? And there are a lot of other movies around this time, Gone in 6 Seconds, this sort of like grimy, hackery feel. I mean, obviously The Matrix. And it's sort of a really fun time, I think, because they can have more fun with it because the internet isn't really anything yet. And so the screenwriter can make it whatever they want it to be. And they can make people who are like internet literate and competent kind of be anything they want to be too. And it's just a fun era for movies, I think.
Yeah.
It's also like this, it's not the case here, but for a lot of that same time period of like the mid to late 90s to early 2000s, there's also an element in a conversation around like the very real impact that like something like September 11th had in terms of like the kind of movies and the themes in them that are being presented, right? Like that's also an element of this too, like how that changed so much of obviously filmmaking and storytelling too.
Yeah, I mean, even that, I hadn't even thought about that, but as soon as you mentioned it, I'm like, oh yeah, another like reason this probably like resonates is it's a very like America, New York, New York, New York, yeah, kind of movie. Just a couple years after all that had gone. So yeah, it's
I can't remember. I will never be able to find the story, but there was a great Twitter like thread about it that had like a link to an actual article too about how anti-military the 90s were as a decade in films, and how like they were like the military was like the bad guys in a lot of stuff, and a lot of big movies they were like incompetent and they were just shit kind of thing. Armageddon, The Rock is a great example of this kind of stuff. And then can you think of really any movies, right? Certainly in the decade after September 11th, where like the military or like cops are really the bad guys that often, right? And it's just not the case, right? Like there was very much a like shift of like, oh, we're all uber patriotic now, right? Absolutely, right? And so there's also that element too that I think is really interesting. Because even in like National Treasure, like the police, even they're not just like incompetent bad guys. They're like ultimately like sort of a secondary hero who helps save Nicolas Cage from going to jail kind of thing. And so I think even there, it's really interesting to kind of see the impact of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Any other favorite moments or anything you want to give a shout out to there before we go ahead and dive into the grades?
I really like the whole sequence with um, Nick Cage and his dad at the house. From, I'm in trouble, dad. Is she pregnant?
Mm,
All the way through, like, you need heat, right? And then, like, blowing on to get up. We need more power. We need more juice. The whole sequence of, like, spraying that. What is this document? The Declaration of Independence, to, like, the gag of, like, them tying him up with, like, a remote and a drink in his hand so he can watch TV and just, like, do that. The agent walking over and being like, it seems like, he took some money and then apparently, like, the Corvette in the garage, and the dad kind of, like, obviously not have known they were taking his car and being like, oh, apparently they also took my car as well. Like, their chemistry is really well, right? Like, I think we touched on it a little bit, but, like, I think the whole cast chemistry is really great, but John Voight and Nicolas Cage play a really good father and son. And, there are some shades and shadows of Last Crusade there, especially with, like, obviously the role John Voight will play later on. And obviously Last Crusade is my favorite Indiana Jones movie, so I am a sucker for that trope. It's also present in Uncharted with Nate and Sully, obviously. And yeah, so I mean, I think that is a source of some of the best, I think, comedic moments, and that whole sequence of the house, I think, is just great. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't give that a shout out.
Yeah, I think in that
great.
vein, I'll give a shout out to the like building of the relationship between Nicolas Cage and Diane Kruger. From their introduction, where he catches that, like, she's a sucker and a nerd for the political pin or the political buttons, and then he wins her over by giving her the one she's missing, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a nerdy, like, we are perfect for each other because we love this super niche, super nerdy thing. It's right. Like, yeah, it's a good, easy shorthand kind of thing, but it's a very in fitting with the rest of this movie kind of fun shorthand. And he just lucks into finding the one person. And I mean, they even touch on this, like, the person who's, crazy enough to love this kind of stuff and passionate enough to love this stuff,
and whose natural curiosity can't help but, like, keep her going along with it.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a lot of fun there. Of course, the whole heist of the Declaration of Independence is a ton of fun.
Great.
And does all of the things a fun heist movie should do. Going wrong, all that stuff. I love the, like, wait, if they didn't shoot at you, who did? Realizing, like, oh, there's another party at play here, kind of introducing that whole idea. And yeah, it's still wild that it's like, oh, that's the end of the first act. Okay, we got 2/3 of this movie to go still. Okay, let's go from there. I'll say I one of the things we talked about, my light spoilers for the show. One of the things we talked about last week, I talked about with Frank, is like the ultimate, like, treasure at the end of the season. Feels like a very TV budget treasure. This, when they get to the treasure room and they light the thing, and the flame just kind of keeps going and going and going, forever. And you see this just vast cavern of riches and stuff like that. It's like, that feels like a $10 billion lost treasure kind of thing. Yeah, great.
Right.
So that's another, like, a thing that they didn't, like, skimp on. I appreciate that.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely a fun, dumb time. I don't need to, like, revisit it every now and then or anything like that. It's fun when I randomly do. And it's one of those things of, like, yeah, it's a good, couple hours thing to throw on in the background. Certainly better than probably, at least half of the Bond movies you and I watched last year. I would rather rewatch this.
Do you know what I think this is on that vein, though? Is this, to me, is like a perfect Sunday afternoon movie, right? You're flipping through the channels, you get to TBS, they're like a third of the way through National Treasure. That is how this movie's meant to be watched. And just kick back and be like, yeah, I'm going to watch the rest of this kind of thing. Like, it's that kind of movie. It's super fun and breezy. You don't need to get that invested into it. Plus, you've already seen it like a dozen times. It doesn't matter. You've seen National Treasure before. So it's great. You just put it on, kick it back, and watch the rest of this movie. And that's National Treasure in a nutshell to me. And that's what I love about it. I love those kind of movies. Like, It is a B movie. It's a B plus movie. It's not quite B movie cheese. It's like just high enough quality to kind of get away from that. And it's great. And it's a ton of fun, I think. And so, we can kind of get in the rankings from there, but I think it's a blast.
Yeah. Speaking of B plus movie, let's go ahead and dive into the report card where we grade from A plus to F. What do you want to give National Treasure here, Logan? Is it a B plus?
My heart says it's an A. I'll give it a B plus, I guess, because that was a good line I said. And so I like that. Movies like this don't really exist anymore, right? And that's also part, I think, of why certainly I can only speak for myself, have such a soft spot for those 90s and early 2000 movies is because like so much of those movies just don't really exist anymore. Like movies I think back of when I think of that time period are like that middle class of movies, and blockbusters were just very different, and they don't really exist anymore. And National Treasure is sort of reflective of that. Like it's just a movie that doesn't really function in the same way anymore, I think, and it's a great time. I think I really do love this movie. It is definitely partially nostalgia and just like having a soft spot for watching it at like the perfect age. But I do also think it is a ton of fun. And in the very crowded field of Indiana Jones inspired / knockoff films, I do think this is one of the better ones. And I really do think I'll pretty much watch Nick Cage do most of anything and probably at the very least be intrigued by Nicolas Cage, if nothing else. And I think this movie's cast is actually legitimately really great, and they pretty much deliver across the board.
Yeah. I'll jump on the B plus train with you there. It's definitely a fun time. And while the realization of like it hitting when I was in college already is like I'm older than I think I am sometimes. And be like, oh yeah, even so, that's still almost 20 years ago now. So
that's exactly what I was gonna say. Like, it's also just like, I think we're in the same way. We operate in the same way, Trevor, where it's like, like the 80s are 20 years ago, the 90s were a decade ago, the 70s were 30 years ago. And it's that kind of thing of being like, well, actually, hang on, let me do some math. Yeah, this is almost 20 years ago now, right? And I had that thought when they were showing like the 70s sequence. I was like, oh yeah, it's like 30 years ago. And then it was like, wait, that would mean that was almost 50 years ago now when he's like a young kid. I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Like, It is also that thing of like, we are just in our 30s now and time keeps moving, obviously, right? It doesn't stay static. And so there's also that element.
I mean, you also had that same kind of thing come up recently with that 90s show on Netflix, basically being like, oh yeah, we're actually like further away from like that show's further away from like the 90s compared to when that 70s show was out. It's like, oh yeah, that's how you make us feel old, is pointing that kind of stuff out.
Yeah.
But yes, so B pluses from both of us. Extra credit, other suggestions if you like this. Of course, Disney Plus out there recommending National Treasure: Edge of History, its new show. Of course, the sequel, which we will talk about next week, National Treasure: Book of Secrets. Then it's also recommending the live action Mulan from a couple years back, A Wrinkle in Time, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales, which I believe is the one I haven't seen. I believe that's like the last of the series so far.
Maybe not.
Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, if you want to go watch Jake Gyllenhaal be Persian. Percy Jackson and the Olympians: Lightning Thief, and The Sorcerer's Apprentice, if you want some more Nicolas Cage.
It's a rough list. I'm not going to sit here and lie. It's a rough one. That's one of the rougher extra credit sequence ones of movies.
Extracurriculars. You watch anything else on Disney Plus there, Logan?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I'm going to say no, and then I'm sure I'm going to think of something immediately afterwards. I feel like I have watched something on Disney Plus recently, but I can't think what it was, so I'll say no.
Mm-hmm. I sat down. It's weird. I sat down and watched Rosalind on Disney Plus, which you can't watch on Disney Plus anymore. It was like a 1 week only thing that they put it up there for like Valentine's Day, basically. But for those that don't know, Rosalind, you can watch it on Hulu, basically is where it's normally. But yeah, it's Caitlin Dever as Rosalind, the first girlfriend of Romeo from Romeo and Juliet, who's basically like off, like
Oh,
they break up, or they're like Romeo like abandons his love of Rosalind. Like at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet, Romeo is like lamenting Rosalind not wanting to date him, see him, and then he sees Juliet and it's off to the races. And so it's a very
that's kind of interesting.
tongue-in-cheek kind of like perspective on the Romeo and Juliet story, but from Rosalind's perspective, where they were, deep in love and whatnot, and then Romeo just falls for this other girl, and so now she's a jilted ex-girlfriend kind of thing. They play with the language being like it's typically much more modern, but when Romeo's getting all flowery, he starts talking in the verse and all that stuff.
That's really cool. I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah, it's a fun little. It's very
That's
much
on
a
Hulu
fun little
now?
rom-com. It's 10 Things I Hate About You, but a little bit more period, but still also like. Like Caitlin Deaver's out there saying shit a bunch of times when like she stumbles upon something of like, oh, that went bad, shit. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I had a good time with it.
It does remind me that I do also just want to watch, I think, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet again as well, because that movie's great and is low key one of the best, I think, interpretations of both Romeo and Juliet and Shakespeare. I think done for like a modern audience. It's great.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, that's the other thing I checked out recently. And then, as we were talking about beforehand, in non D+ stuff, I've been watching a ton of Last of Us. Cameron and I basically watching that every week when that comes out. So it's a good show. But yeah, that is going to do it for this week's episode of That D+ Show. Thank you, Logan, for joining me to discuss National Treasure. We will once again be back next week with National Treasure Book of Secrets. Continue that train a-rolling. You can follow Logan at Lefty Logie, Loggy. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Logan?
I will give a shout out to Trevor Starkey's Let's Play Adventures. He is both going through... You're doing something with Cameron. Let's see if I can get it right. It's not Fallout. It's the one game that's really hard and tough. It's one of the Souls games, I think, right?
It's Elden Ring, yes.
It's the new one. Yeah, thank you. Elden Ring with Cameron, and then you just posted today, and I immediately tweeted at it, apparently going through Breath of the Wild as well. I hope you stay strong and stand your ground on the game and its issues. I'm sure it's going to be playing through Breath of the Wild before its sequel comes out.
Indeed, yeah, That's that. Right now, we are in It turns out Cameron deciding to do Friday Night Dying Light last year really set us down this path of, hey, we're going to do a whole bunch of like long form Let's Play stuff, which makes it way easier than having to try and find new games every week. Cameron and I are continuing playing through Elden Ring. We're 6 or 7 episodes into that now, where he's kind of like helping shepherd me through, and haven't rage quit that. I actually might sit down after we're done recording here and start like recording for next week. But yeah, so those episodes are going out Tuesdays, and kind of off the heels of the Nintendo Direct last week, where there was it basically ended with Tears of the Kingdom. I was like, all right, I have Breath of the Wild. I originally played Breath of the Wild on my Wii U, but I do have it on Switch as well. And so I was like, all right, let me try giving Breath of the Wild another shot. I've notoriously in our little circles kind of poo-pooed the game. It's
me and you're the two big people that
not even poo-pooed it, just been like, it's a fine game. It's not a bad game by any means, but it's fine. It's not doing anything crazy, and the things it is doing don't work with me a lot. And so far in the few episodes I have recorded so far of Breath of the Wild, I'm still very annoyed by a lot of those things. Weapon degradation. The one I had forgotten that is immediately annoying me again is how slow Link is at climbing everything. And that especially combined with when it rains and everything you climb becomes super slippery, and you just have to wait out the rain. Like I sat in a spot for a good 15 minutes the other day, just waiting for rain to stop, and it didn't. So I finally was like, all right, I'm going to leave and then go to a different thing, I guess. Dumb little tedious things like that are annoying, but I'm still pushing through. We'll see. We'll see if my opinions ultimately change on Elden Ring or Breath of the Wild here in the weeks ahead. But yeah, you can find those, and then we'll probably have random Let's Plays slotted in there, scattered throughout. for any new games that are coming out. Like I did Sea of Stars. I did a Let's Play of that earlier this week on Monday, the demo of that game, because I'm very excited for that one. So yeah, you go find all of our Let's Plays over at youtube.com/thatnerdysite. But for the foreseeable future, Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild will be the Tuesday, Thursday tent poles of that series. You can also catch That Nerdy Site Show, our weekly just kind of catch-all podcast. This week, Cameron and I sat down, as we often do in kind of early year stuff. We went through the Game Informer 2023 game releases list and kind of figured out what our most anticipated games are throughout the year, and kind of just chatted a whole bunch of games there. So go catch that as well. And yeah, you can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. You can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site or go to thatnerdysite.com. I'll also shout out Cameron, because none of the rest of us have actually gotten around to doing this, but Cameron got his Game of the Year write-up done and up on the website. So you can go catch that. Maybe we will eventually get our other Movie of the Year and Game of the Year lists.
I'll do Movie of the Year. That's a great reminder.
So yeah. You can find all that over at YouTube at thatnerdysite.com. Once again, if you liked what you heard, please like, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Subscribe, ring notification bells, do all of the call to action things that every YouTuber ever asks you to do, every podcaster ever asks you to do. Thank you for joining us. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other. Class dismissed.